Bonamici for 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you to the chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for being here. I represent a district in Northwest Oregon, and I know at home in the Northwest, but also across the country and around the globe, people are demanding comprehensive action to reduce greenhouse gas emissions to address the climate crisis. It's such a critical issue, and to meaningfully do that, to reduce emissions, we need to accelerate our transition, a just transition to a 100% clean energy economy, and that is going to take robust investments in EERE. And even as Mr. Reardon, your testimony pointed out, over the last 12 years, the investments in EERE, $20 billion, has yielded a net economic benefit of $230 billion. So and going back to Mr. Caston's point about these are good investments, and that's why we need to be making them. Mr. Krishnaswami, we appreciate the NRDC's continued efforts to provide oversight and transparency on the DOE's attempts to sideline congressional intent in allocating the EERE and ARPA-E funds. And in your testimony, you noted that EERE ended fiscal year 2019 with about 4% of the office's funds unallocated and 18% unspent. And ARPA-E ended with 48 to 68% of its funds unallocated and up to 91% unspent. How do these carryover amounts compare to previous administrations, and how has the delayed distribution of those funds affected our nation's capabilities to effectively reduce greenhouse gas emissions and transition to a clean energy economy? When we look at the return we get on those investments, what has that meant to our energy future?
Thank you, Congresswoman. I'd note 2 points. The first is that when we looked back at this analysis, we went back several years into the prior administration, and we found that consistently both EERE and ARPA-E were putting out the announcements of funding opportunities later in the year and actually awarding choosing the selections also later in the year or after the fiscal year had ended. So especially over the last 2 years, ARPA-E and EERE were behind where we were under the prior administration. And to your broader question, the second point is really that we know that these programs, as has been stated several times, are really beneficial in terms of the return on taxpayer investment to the public. We also know that they've already made a dent in the climate challenge, and that they need to be much, much larger to actually match the scale of the climate crisis. So any delays in getting that money to researchers and businesses, or preventing it from getting to the public, is really a delay in those benefits from reaching people and a delay in combating this urgent climate crisis.
Absolutely, and I'll note, I came prior to this hearing this morning. We had a hearing in the Select Committee on the Climate Crisis where we were talking about the health effects of the climate crisis, and former EPA Administrator McCarthy was there. We were talking about the social costs of carbon and the health care costs that are also so important to consider. So we need to consider all those aspects as well. So I wanted to also ask again, Mr. Krishnaswami and Mr. Reardon, I share your concerns that given the significant backlog of unobligated funds within EERE, the department has not hired more staff to help process more FOAs since the federal hiring freeze was lifted. So in your opinion, what's delaying the department? Mr. Gay, you might want to weigh in on this as well. What's delaying the department in hiring more staff? And as we look to the president's budget proposal next week, how will the administration respond to the 2020 report language about the department reaching a staffing level of 650 FTEs this year?
Thank you. I would note that we don't know exactly what has changed within the hiring process at DOE or what is causing each individual hold up in announcing positions or filling the positions. But we do see the trends in the data, which show that the number of staff have decreased, and particularly with increasing budgets. So really, I think it's really important to understand and identify what those holdups are, what has changed in the process of hiring, and we encourage you to work with DOE to determine that, identify it, and change it so that ERE can hire faster.
And thank you. I have a little bit of time left, Mr. Reardon, and Dr. Gay.
Yeah, I'd be happy to jump in there. I have no idea what's causing the holdup. Clearly, there is one. Clearly, the EERE is far too understaffed. The point that I think I would add to other things I've already said is that we've talked about not having a blank check to these companies that are receiving these grant funds. One way to make certain that we are not, in fact, giving a blank check is to ensure that we have enough staff to be out there tracking and providing the absolutely necessary oversight that the American people deserve.
Yeah, and the light turned red, but Dr. Gay, very briefly, do you have a couple words to?
Yes, this is about delegation of authority, that being able to delegate the responsibility and hold people accountable. During the course of the past several years, the hurdle has raised rather than stayed where it was or been lowered in order to have the authority to carry out the hiring.
Thank you. I yield back.